And good evening from the 3 News Newsroom. How's that? I'm Russ Mitchell from Channel 3 News. We're going to talk impeachment inquiry public hearings. The first ones are tomorrow, and the second group comes on Friday. With me right now is Lee Fisher. He is the Dean of the Cleveland Marshall Law School at Cleveland State University. Lee Fisher, it's good to see you.
Thanks, Russ. Appreciate it.
We always appreciate your insight. So we're talking history there. No matter where you are on the political aisle, this is an historic moment. This has happened only, 4 times in our history. So Lee, if I'm watching tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, what's the first thing I should look out for?
Well, the first thing you're going to look at is 2 witnesses. One is William Taylor, who's the acting ambassador to the Ukraine. The other is a guy named George Kent, who's an assistant secretary of state. They've already testified privately. Now they're going to be doing it publicly. So it's really not going to be any surprise to those people who know what they said behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. What they're basically going to say is that they believe that what the president did was inappropriate. It's not their decision whether it's impeachable, but they're going to be very clear that by promising to give aid to Ukraine in exchange for investigation of Joe Biden, the president's political rival, that's considered by most people to be inappropriate. But there is obviously division as to whether it's impeachable.
And they will be questioned by both Democrats and Republicans tomorrow,
yes.
Of course, so it could get pretty contentious at times.
And you know what's interesting about this? Normally you do this ping pong thing, 5 minutes the Democrats, 5 minutes Republicans. They're going to do it a little differently tomorrow, and I think it's good. Mm-hmm. The Democrats are going to have 45 minutes. The Republicans are going to have 45 minutes.
That is different.
You get a lot much more done. Now later in the afternoon they'll do the ping pong again, 5 minutes, but I think that's actually a political theater and political show. It doesn't do much. But I do like the fact they're going to do 45-minute segments. Then the public will actually learn something.
Will the respective chairman and vice chairman preside over his party's questioning?
Yes, here Adam Schiff, who's the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, will begin with an opening statement. Then the ranking Republican member, Grafton Nunes, will also do his statement. Then the Democrats will have 45 minutes to question the witnesses, William Taylor and George Kent, and then the Republicans will. And it's very possible that it won't be members of Congress doing the questioning. They actually can have their own legal counsel doing it. So you could see a lawyer representing the Democrats doing the questioning and a lawyer representing the Republicans, which I think is actually good too, because it becomes a little less political.
3 congressmen from Ohio also going to do the questioning tomorrow.
That's exactly right.
Including Jim Jordan, who was he put on this committee?
He was put on this committee just for this
specifically
hearing.
for this.
He's really not on this committee, but
right.
The Republicans can do that. He was moved from the Oversight Committee to the Intelligence Committee.
He's pretty much been the front person in the Republicans' defense here.
He's very aggressive. There's no question about that. And I think the Republicans want somebody who's very aggressive in defense, just as the Democrats want somebody who's very aggressive in terms of arguing that it's impeachable.
Let's talk about the significance of this. As you said, these congressmen and congresswomen will have heard this testimony in closed-door hearings. I was 14 years old during Watergate. I can remember sitting there, my parents making me sit down and watch the Watergate hearings. And what I remember about that is that turned the tide, because for the first time the public was seeing this. They would read about it in the newspaper, and back then you only had 3 networks, so you saw it on TV. But for the first time, America saw these folks on TV and saw them being questioned. The congressmen became stars in their own right.
They did.
Things are a lot more fragmented now. There's so many.
Yes.
You can watch this tomorrow. You can watch the reruns of 90 Day Fiancé tomorrow. Will this have the same impact that it did? What would that be? 55 years ago?
Russ, you've hit on the major difference. There was no social media. There was no streaming live like we're doing tonight. There was no cable television. And so America was transfixed on ABC and NBC and CBS doing these television hearings. They really weren't too distracted. Now, although there will be a lot of Americans watching these hearings, they'll do it sporadically.
Yeah.
They won't do it with the intensity and the focus they did back in the 1970s with Nixon and Watergate. Therefore, the hearings will have an impact, but less of a dramatic impact than they did back in 1973 and 4 with Nixon.
Mm-hmm. That'd be 45 years ago, I believe.
Yes.
Aging myself.
I never question your math because I'm not very good at it.
That's why I went into this business, Lee. That's why I didn't become a scientist.
Well, I went into my business too, Russ. Same idea.
I understand. Yeah. So it will be fragmented. People will tune in and out. So that kind of thing will go on.
That's right.
Will be going on. On Friday, you have Marie Yovanovitch testifying, the former ambassador to Ukraine, who was fired, who had damaging testimony behind closed doors. Of the people we're going to hear this week, potentially, who could have the most effective testimony as far as the Democrats are concerned?
I actually think Marie Yovanovitch on Friday because Rudy Giuliani is involved in that one. It's a thick plot because Rudy Giuliani, behind the scenes, was trying to get her fired on behalf of the president. And the argument is that he was trying to get her fired because she didn't agree with President Trump and Rudy Giuliani that Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, had done something wrong. They didn't like that. So they wanted her out of the way so they could have an investigation by the Ukraine of what happened with Joe Biden's son. So I think it's fair to say that all three could be explosive, but that'll be the most explosive one in my opinion.
And as we look forward to next week, no names have been released yet, but how long does the committee believe this will go on before an actual vote will take place?
My best guess is that the week of December 16th will be the week that the House will vote. And just ironically, it was December 19th, 1998, when the House voted to impeach Bill Clinton.
Interesting.
So it's almost the same timing, almost perhaps to the day.
Then this goes to the Senate, where at this point, it goes to trial in the Senate,
Yeah.
where at this point it does not appear as though, because the Senate is Republican controlled, that the Senate will vote to remove President Trump from office. But I heard something interesting today, that McConnell, theoretically,
Yes.
could call for a silent vote, or a private vote, or a secret vote. And that could change the game considerably. Is that even a thing in the Senate? Can you have a secret vote? Or and I would think your constituents that would not go over.
The answer, I don't think America would like it, but the interesting thing is the Constitution doesn't lay out the rules very clearly. So the truth is there's a lot of wiggle room in terms of what the Republicans and the Democrats can do, both in the House and in the Senate. The likely outcome here is that there's about a 99% chance that in mid-December, the House will vote to impeach President Trump. And he will then be the third United States president in our history to be impeached. But as many people now know, impeached doesn't mean you're removed from office. It means you're sort of indicted. Now it goes to the Senate for the trial. And unlike a majority vote in the House, you have to have a 2/3 vote in the Senate. The Republicans control the Senate. So the likelihood of a 2/3 vote to convict is very low, certainly less than 50%. So if you were betting today, you'd bet that the president would be impeached, but you'd also bet that the president will not be convicted in the Senate.
Let's go back to 1998, a little closer in history. Last time a president was impeached, other than the issue on the table, what's the big difference between then and now?
Well, I think it's fair to say we've always been partisan, but it's even more partisan. It was partisan in Nixon days, it was partisan in Clinton days, but I've lived through all these, never as divisive and as partisan as now. And so there's a tendency for both parties to sort of look at the facts and interpret them the way they already decided they were going to interpret them. Much like America will watch these hearings. Most of America has already decided whether or not the president did something wrong and whether it was impeachable. Now what's interesting is that you do have, unlike the Clinton years, you do have some Republicans saying that what President Trump did was wrong and inappropriate, but they're also saying just because it was wrong and inappropriate doesn't mean it was illegal and impeachable. I didn't hear that too much during the Clinton years. Having said that, the biggest difference probably is that even social media back in the Clinton days wasn't very vibrant.
Oh, no, not
in
at
fact,
all.
it was
Sure.
just really beginning. So the biggest difference between Clinton, Nixon, and Trump is social media, cable television, satellite TV, and the fact that we are distracted in 1,000 different ways. And it's much harder for people to make their case for or against.
I touched on the history of this a moment ago, but if you would amplify that for me, how big a deal is this in the chapter of history?
Regardless of your politics, regardless of your views as to whether President Trump did something wrong or not, this is huge. In American history, we've only had 4 presidents in this situation, and only 2 of them actually were impeached. Now, President Nixon would have been impeached, but he resigned in advance. So let's assume he was. It still would only be the 4th president ever to be impeached, and really the 3rd since Nixon wasn't. Now that's a pretty big deal, given the fact that we were founded back in 1776.
Sure.
So yes, it's a big deal, and I'm hoping that Americans will at least watch it because it's a historic moment, regardless of whether they've already made up their minds as to whether the president did something impeachable or he didn't.
He also, of course, former Attorney General, former Lieutenant Governor of the state of Ohio, a Democrat. I'm going to ask you to put on your political hat
Sure.
for just a minute. In terms of the politics of this, there was, before the impeachment process actually began, President Trump was, some would say, was actually inviting impeachment because he thought that would work well with his base.
Yes.
We are now in the second phase of this, and stuff's getting getting real. Is that potentially still the case here? Does impeachment, these proceedings, help President Trump with his base?
You know, I think what happens here is impeachment helps both sides, because what you're going to see in 2020 is the largest turnout of a presidential election perhaps in our history, because both Republicans and Democrats have never been more motivated. This will remotivate those who are Trump supporters, and it will remotivate those who are against Trump. And I actually believe that in the end, this will not necessarily be a big advantage to either those who are opposing Trump or those who favor Trump. Both sides will be energized by it, and more people will get involved in this campaign in 2020, and more people will vote in 2020 than we've ever seen. Regardless of the outcome, that's not a bad thing. That's actually a good thing. More people being involved in the process is a good thing for America.
Yeah, but what a historic day. Historic days coming up, historic weeks coming up.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the fact that this is so close to the election is actually in favor of Trump and the Republicans. Why? Because I think most Americans would say, look, there's an election coming up. Let's not impeach him if we know that we can decide whether he should be president or not at the ballot box. So in the end, that's why I don't think he'll be convicted. I think that even the American people who are against Trump and who will vote against Trump may not want him to be convicted, because they'll say, wait a second, that's what the ballot box is for. And because impeachment is not black and white, it's not clear, let's say that perhaps he did something wrong by impeaching him, but let's hold off on the conviction and let's make the final decision, not in the Senate, not in the House, but at the ballot box in November 2020.
Before I let you go, let me ask you about some of these folks on both sides of the aisle who are either very strongly against the president or are defending him vehemently.
Yes.
If you're one of those folks, are you thinking about your legacy?
I think you are.
Really?
Yes, I think you are. I think people like Adam Schiff on the Democratic side, Jim Jordan on the Republican side, they know that the world's eyes are on them right now. And I think history will look at them and say, okay, did they do this because they were being purely political? Or did they actually say, wait a second, we've got to look, and wherever the chips may fall, we've got to do the right thing. You could argue that people like Howard Baker, a Republican U.S. Senator back in the days of Richard Nixon, wasn't really that partisan. He said, look, I got to let the chips fall where they may. I think President Nixon did something wrong here. He's got to go. Will that happen this time? Not as likely.
Yeah, I remember Howard Baker from Tennessee, of course,
yes.
An unlikely person to be in that position.
And he was a great U.S. Senator.
Right, Senator Sam, of course.
Sam Ervin on the Democratic side, Howard Baker on the Republican side. And what made that historic is that you had two U.S. senators who, although they were partisan, in the end actually focused more on the Constitution and the law than they did their political party. I wish we could say that again this time. We'll see.
All right, Lee Fisher, as always.
Thank you, Russ.
It is great to see you, and we'll talk to you throughout the week.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And we appreciate you watching. And you can watch on Channel 3 tomorrow, also on our website as well. On a historic day, wherever you are, sit down and watch this. This is history, something you're going to talk to your grandkids about someday, certainly.
I agree.
We'll see you soon.